Good morning and welcome to OSW Daily. My name is Steve Todd. I'm the founder of Open Source Workplace and also the global head of workplace at NASDAQ. Thank you for joining. If this is your first time, I hope you find value in this. And if you do, please consider subscribing, sharing the link with your friends and colleagues so that they too can enjoy OSW Daily. And what I really wanted to sort of dig about today is change and change management. And today we've got Neil Usher, who is an author and who has written a book, and we're going to dig into some of his thoughts and his mindsets of what change is. So Open Source Workplace is a community committed to sharing knowledge related to work. So I just want you to sort of dig into this, and we're going to bring Neil in. Neil, how are you doing?
Hi, great to be
Welcome.
here. Thank you.
So Neil, I have to confess, while I was doing all that introduction, I had my phone going. All that was coming through my ears as I was talking and trying to do the intro. So I apologize if my intro to you wasn't quite succinct. So welcome and welcome back to the channel.
Thanks. No, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, no, so we're going to talk about change. And I just want to pull up one slide that sort of, I thought, encapsulated a lot of things have changed. Because when we think of workplace, we think of change management, we think about that process of change. But actually, what you've introduced and what you're introducing is this view of change. So I just want to pull this up. So change is our very essence. As physical beings, we're constantly consuming, replicating, and shredding until we're no more. Nothing about us is ever static. Not only are we constantly changing, but we want things to change. We're inherently unsatisfied. We set goals, ambitious targets. We're always casting hooks into the future, hauling ourselves forward. For us, change is both reality and aspiration in equal measure. And I almost read this and I'm like, wow, but I'm also thinking, change is a paradox. We want it, but we're so resistant to it. Autonomy, we really love the change, but actually if it's sort of dictated to us, we're quite resistant to that.
No, absolutely. I mean, I had to sort of start with a kind of fundamental understanding of change before sort of going on writing more about it. It's we're full of sort of just we repeat the same things over and over again about change. People hate change. We don't like it. We don't want to do it. But actually, one of the things I find really interesting is we think about change, I think, very differently in our personal lives than we do in our organizational lives. And sometimes we forget that actually, the experience of change we take from our personal lives, it should be no different really in the sort of organizational capacity we exist in most of the time. Why do we look at change and think about change in an entirely different way when we go through the revolving door? We have our own, this is very much something we have our own personal experience of, and we need to draw on that when we're thinking about change within the organizations we work in.
Yeah, and it's because the always saying is, right, change is as good as a holiday, except when it comes to the work environment, and therefore the approach is somewhat different. And I also like how you think about change realities, right? And you almost think about that mindset. What is that individual who's going to be managing that change? What are they got to be thinking? And you state it as open, preparedness, dexterous, resourceful, and optimistic. Optimistic was a one that really surprised me, but so did open. But the more I thought about open, you have to be so open, right?
Absolutely, and with optimism, and it sort of comes top of the charts whenever anyone's thinking about the qualities of a great leader. The ability to be optimistic is right up there all the time as a fundamental aspect of great leadership. But that doesn't mean to say being optimistic without being cautious at the same time as well, and understanding that with every opportunity comes an associated risk. We have to sort of see the potential advantages in the opportunity and manage the risk at the same time. And it's back to balance. And balance is a feature of the elemental workplace. Balance is very much a feature of this work on change too. We usually find the key to sort of what we're faced with the challenges we're faced in some sort of balance.
Yeah, and I love to open because we have to be reminded at times whenever we go through process, when we go through change, sometimes we don't know what the outcome is going to be, and keeping that openness so that we actually can be open, for a word, to alternative ways to get to a solution, but also what that solution may be.
And we're always craving certainty, and if you think about the way most organizations work, they try and sort of steamroller through uncertainty. We must know what's going on. We must know what lies ahead. Constantly geared towards a position of certainty. Whereas the difficulty is that if everything is really certain, then nothing interesting ever happens. the real opportunities we find in our lives and in our personal and our organizational lives are those that exist in a state of uncertainty. When things are moving, when things ahead of us are moving and changing as well, that's where we can find these pathways to a more interesting future. So I think we sometimes fear uncertainty unduly, and that sort of open mindset, open approach, being open to opportunities and being open to change is absolutely vital. And we can't be scared of it. We can't fear it in that sense because, as I say, the opportunity lies right at the heart of that uncertainty.
Yeah, and so I mean, you take today, right? You take leadership, you take where they're trying to give certainty in a very, very uncertain times. I mean, how do they approach that? How do they think about that?
Again, I think it's this balance, and I think a lot of what we see in terms of the commentary around the workplace itself has been interesting. It's quite polarized in the sense of those who are incredibly pessimistic about this is just a sort of situation we have to get through, and then we'll go back to doing what we used to do. And then those who think that absolutely everything is broken and everything is changed and everything is going to be completely different in the future. There are probably elements of truth in both. There are some threads from the past that will remain with us and that we will continue to follow, and then there are some new opportunities that we'll see in the future and that we will explore. And we're balancing both of those. We can't completely throw away the past in this sense. We'll be completely rootless, and we need some of what was working in our past to build on for the future. But I don't think there's any doubt that there are opportunities ahead. There are opportunities for us to work differently, for our workplaces to be different, for our lives to be different in this sense, and beneficially so. But with that comes some risks as well. But I mean, what a time to start exploring! What a time to start
Right.
thinking about a better world of work and a better workplace for everyone.
And we talk when you sort of think you talked about there, okay, things that we're going to throw away or not throw away, right? How do you identify what those things are? And then also, is a change leader or a change manager, or however we want to phrase that, how do you eliminate your own bias to actually get to the right answer?
I think we spend a lot of our time planning change rather than necessarily preparing for it. And I think there is a big difference between, being prepared, which means there are going to be eventualities I haven't considered in all of this, but I have the resources, the tools, the knowledge, the people around me that I need to be able to meet these challenges. But also, and then the sort of the sense that everything must be fixed in a plan, and we then have to follow that plan, and we must not deviate from that plan, and we will damn well get there, whatever. We torture ourselves with planning a lot of the time. They need these sort of, our planning needs to be fairly loose, particularly in this current situation. So better prepared with a much looser plan is probably the sort of mindset and approach we need to take
Mm.
here. Right, but there are other times in the last sort of few decades where it's probably been a situation where we can be a little more confident in planning, and the preparedness can be sort of dialed down a little because we're very confident of where we potentially need to go and how we need to get there. But I think this is very much an age which is about preparedness rather than necessarily planning, because it's going to be iterative and emergent. We're going to learn. We're going to have to take that in. And as you say, in terms of biases, we're going to have to be honest with ourselves where we think we may well have, sort of prejudiced the outcome by a position we take. Um, there's a there's a tool that I've referenced in the Cynefin framework, and an earlier iteration of that framework looked at and you may well have sort of remember it from Donald Rumsfeld talking about known knowns and known unknowns and unknown unknowns in a speech in 2002. The most interesting pain in that sort of four blocker really is the sort of those things that we know but we are actually suppressing, the things that you reference bias there, the things that we sort of need to face up to, and actually admit to ourselves that is the situation. And we'll be dealing with a lot of that today as well, because a situation of uncertainty tends to mean that we need a little more inward reflection at the same time in terms of what we're seeing and experiencing, being honest with ourselves. And I think that's how we end up sort of navigating our way through that sort of tendency to being biased.
And is the bias element, you think, the hardest part to manage?
I think in terms of sort of the sort of the things we know and the things that we don't know, I think it is the hardest because it involves us looking in the mirror and being honest with ourselves and admitting that we potentially are sort of suppressing some information that we kind of know is there, but actually we're not being forthcoming with it, and that's just a personal battle that we're going through. So. Again, back to sort of how we approach change as an individual as much as how we approach it in an organizational sense. Just about all of the learning about change that we can take into an organizational environment comes from our own personal experience of it and our own personal lives.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. And in personal lives, we love change, right? We love having been able to do something quicker, faster, better, and we're prepared to put up with a few quirks or a learning curve. Where sometimes in the organizational environment, we're a little more resistant to that.
In an organizational environment, there's usually a lot more people involved, but
Right.
on a similarly scaled, anything we want to do in our personal lives has opportunities, has risks, has other people involved, have things that may be unexpected, and there is this sort of intrinsic sort of relationship with everything in our lives, with everything else that's going on around, in the way that we're trying to get stuff done where nothing is standing still. Nothing's standing still in our personal lives either, in the
Right.
same way that
Right.
it's not standing still in an organization. So if we actually, I think sometimes if we stop and we trace through a change that we've made in our personal lives and we think about the problems, the barriers we encountered, the views of others. You could say, look, I'm going to dye my hair. It's about time I change. I'm fed up with having dark hair for all my life. I'm going to dye it. I'm going to bleach it or whatever. There's going to be other people around you who are going to have a view on that, and there are people who are going to probably try and stop you doing it, try and talk you out of it. Hide your wallet, whatever it takes. There's going to be other things going on around that decision you've taken because the minute you actually express it, the change process has begun the moment it became a conscious thought, possibly
Yeah.
even before that.
Yeah.
It's in your unconscious. Something's not right. Something needs to be different. That process has already begun, which is why I sort of hold really that sort of change is effectively the overriding discipline that we're all operating with it. It's not our profession. If we're a workplace professional, we're actually a change leader first and foremost, and we're a work professional second, because actually change sits over all of this, and we can understand that when we think about the changes we're driving in our personal lives, and it's so that the dyeing of the hair might be the event, might be the thing that we need to do. So we need somewhere to do it. It needs to be open at a certain time. We need to have the money to pay for it. There's a whole series of preparation that goes into that. Then there's a plan in terms of the day that I'm going to do it, and the booking I make, and all those sorts of things. Um, but it started long before we ever started being prepared for it, and it's actually going to go on longer than the end of what we consider to be the project. So we come home with our hair bleached, and then everybody's got a view on it, and everybody's sort of, and then you'll walk down the street, and people will be sort of interacting with you, or it goes on long after we think it's finished. So change is always the overriding discipline, which is why we have to understand it, and why we have to be prepared for it, and we have to know how to lead it. It makes us better at our profession that we've chosen, better at the discipline that we operate within, if we actually understand change and prepare ourselves to be great leaders of change.
No, and I appreciate the analogy. And all that's gone through my head is if we get an insight into the Usher household and the conversations that happen and the things that the things that go on there. So I appreciate that. Thank you. But you say change happens in a predictive curve. What do you mean?
Oh no, it absolutely doesn't. Sorry if I need to go back and check what I've written about that. The curve that everybody is associates with change, and people still talk about the change curve, was the Kubler-Ross grieving curve.
Hmm.
When we think about it, and one of the things I tried to sort of trace really was how something associated with what we go through, when we're giving some news about something that's likely to affect our personal health, how that became the change curve. But we don't change in this predictable curve. We think about the changes in our personal life and in our organizational life. That's sort of the kind of shock that's associated with changes very rarely in existence. These things emerge. They very rarely emerge as a bolt from the blue. They emerge through conversation and interaction, and the seeds are sown. And so they come into being in a particular way, and it's iterative, constantly iterative. The sort of emotions that are captured in a grieving curve occur, not just once. They don't just occur at one stage of a curve. They occur throughout the process. And everything that we then do within leading a change initiative prompts those emotions and interactions again. So this whole process of thinking that it sits somehow on this neat curve, if it was that easy, we'd all be leading. It would be a breeze. Leading change would be something that nobody would ever bother writing about or talking about again. It's like, there you go, there's your curve. That's what happens. Get ready for it. Let's go. And it doesn't happen like that at all. So I've tried to sort of dispense with that curve and say, look, it's really interesting. It was a fascinating piece of work in terms of the field that it was originally launched in. But somehow, having kind of brought it into the field of leading change and thinking that that's how it happens, I just don't think it's particularly useful for us from here on.
Yeah, and to be fair, Neil, that was I set that up wrong because that was one of the realities that you painted. That was the statement, and you did go on, and you do go on and say that everyone changes at their own pace. So that was on me, that one. So I appreciate you telling us. So then, tell us about your approach to change. Then, if you're dispelling this one.
It's an entirely iterative process. It's this, in terms of the sort of complex adaptive systems that we exist within. Everything we do has an impact on everything else. We are moving through. We are taking ourselves on a path through an ever-moving landscape where everything we do has an impact on everything else, and everything else that's happening has an impact on what we're doing. And there's been a huge tendency over the years to see sort of, when we think about organizational change, regarding it as being something that sort of happens in the lab. It's very sort of sterilized, it's very clean. And that if only we just sort of set out that path and plan this in the right way, we're going to be successful. And like with a lot of sort of large scale projects, usually the most visible part of it is the implementation. So it's the implementation that usually gets the blame rather than sort of the original idea behind it or anything. You did it wrong. It's a great idea, but you just didn't implement it very well. It's your fault. So there's usually a sort of the search for something that went wrong in all of that. But it's an iterative process. Hence the need to be prepared, the need to understand change, the need to have a very soft plan that we're prepared to let evolve as well through this process, and understanding that we're not in a lab, we're not in a highly cleansed environment where nothing that's going on around us is going to have any impact at all. So I think it's a very human approach. If we think about everything in our own lives, that's how our lives work. So why would we approach organizational change in a different way to that?
Yeah, no, and it's you do that nicely where it's the why, the how, and what are the specific requirements. So it is pretty good. And you do say that everything flows, that nothing is ever started and finished. And you actually paint a nice picture of software as a service, in a sense of how to think about change as software as a service. So rather than buying a physical hardware product, you buy software that is completely iterative. So it's a really nice analogy.
Now, the software industry is actually, I think, of all of the industries that we encounter, is probably the industry that is most comfortable with change that I've detected, really. Right back to the sort of Agile Manifesto in 2001, and sort of the way that it breaks large scale tasks down into much smaller tasks that allow evolution to occur, that are very iterative. Small parcels of work that are regularly reviewed and appraised, and then that builds, rather than the old style way of doing things, which was a huge sort of briefing process, specification, systems analysis, and then the coding, and then the rollout, which is where so many of those large scale schemes went wrong before the agile sort of approach came into being. But the agile approach itself, and that's with a capital A, not a small a, not agile workplace, but the agile approach to software development, is a whole approach that sits incredibly comfortable with change, and actually embodies it, builds it in. It's a sort of core part of that process. And so, software as a service, where you don't get your product in a sort of on a CD-ROM in a cellophane box, and maybe people listening who don't remember that, but that's how we used to buy software. It was a great big manual, and a couple of CD-ROMs, and it was a package, which meant that it was pretty fixed. Unless there was another CD-ROM sent to you, that's what you bought, and you used it until another product came along later that replaced it. Whereas now it's it is never finished. And the other part of that really is this effective feedback loop. It's the consumer or the user of the product being part of the design process. So having an open dialogue, because if nothing's ever finished, then and it's going to sort of move with the times and move with the challenges that it's facing, then it needs to hear from those people that are using it. It's fundamental, because the improvements that are made and the changes made to that software have to be as a direct result of people's experience. What's working, what's not working, what's needed. All of these factors have to be considered. So it doesn't, this sort of idea of perpetual beta doesn't work unless there is an open and effective feedback loop. So, and I don't consider an annual survey to be a feedback loop. I mean, we're talking about something that occurs daily, that is available to everybody on an ongoing basis. It's not a snapshot. It's not a once in time thing. If we really want, occupiers of workplace to be involved in that feedback loop, then we have to use sort of more dynamic tools. We have to use enterprise social networks and those sorts of tools to make sure that they're actually, fundamentally a part of the design process.
So, I mean, I totally agree with you. And so we're in this environment at the moment where we're talking about a fluid change. Then we bring in the element of workplace, right? And we sort of put those two aspects together. What guidance would you give to organizations, to workplace leaders in how to approach that? Because we're really good when we know what the end game is and delivering that end game. But,
Yeah.
we know what we're going to go through is a very iterative process. So how would you guide people through that today?
Now, if you think about our industry, the vast majority of our industry is geared towards the creation of sort of static outcomes. It's geared towards, think about leasing and capital projects and design, and it's really all geared around creating something that it's hope will stand the test of time. Sort of architecture itself, buildings designed to last somewhere between 50 and 100 years, and then fit outs designed to last 5 to 10 years. It's still all about creating something static. Um, I think that the plea to our industry is we have to be much more comfortable with change and much more comfortable with sort of a more emergent and iterative approach to the workplace than we perhaps have been in the past. It's not good enough in the future, I don't believe, to rely on people self-organizing and expecting that once that static reality has been created, people will just kind of ebb and flow and make their choices and organize themselves. It's too big a challenge for that to happen effectively. We have to work with the occupants of space. We have to have this feedback loop. We have to regard every workplace as a perpetual experiment, and we have to make sure that it sort of lives and grows with us rather than a sort of 3 month strategy process, a 6 month design process, and then a huge amount of money spent creating something that might have worked in the past, and it's created some great workplaces in the past. And it's been a successful formula for decades. But I just can't see that formula being successful moving on from here. It'll be necessary from time to time, but it's not the panacea. It's not the solution. We can't think of design always being the solution to the problem. Our workplace isn't quite working. Well, let's redesign it and refit it out, and then it will work. Well, if you don't start looking at the way people are working and understanding people and understanding the culture of the organization and understanding the way that work is changing itself that's driving all of that, and the way the organization is changing, and start getting much further upstream in the process than just the physical outcome in the workplace, then a lot of time and money is going to be wasted in the future.
Yeah, and as you're talking through that, Neil, I'm actually just thinking through, right? You think about capital projects, right? They're definitive, they're defined. The outcome is sort of, designed, it's then costed, and then we implement. But in this environment where we're looking to go through an iterative change, do you think that process is going to be, needs to change as well? So, for example, you've been involved in many projects over your time working at Sky, etc., and you know how this works. The uncertainty of what the actual cost of a project may be, because we're going to go through this iterative process. Do we have to rethink how their approach to that?
Yeah, I think we do. I think there are sort of two ways to look at it. Really, it's either a case of looking at what exists today and then moving towards a future that we think may work, and then listening, adjusting as we go. But I think also it's perfectly valid now. It's a great opportunity to think, well, let's suspend our knowledge of everything that exists today. What is it if we were standing in the car park today? The buildings that we occupy disappeared. What as an organisation would we actually need? What is the minimum viable workplace that this organisation needs from here? Because we've probably never had an opportunity to think in this way before. And again, we'd be looking at borrowing a lot of thinking, a lot of approaches from the software industry, which seems to be, in many respects, streets ahead of where the workplace industry is at the moment. Um, but in thinking about, well, let's actually create what it is we would build today if that's what we needed, and then let's see how we would map across from where we are. Then let's sort of do the reveal and bring back in, well, actually that future looks fantastic, but now let's just have a little look at what we do have today, and let's look at how we map from today to this potential future. But we're also seeing a lot of organisations talking about what they might do. Yes, we may release our space, we may reduce our property portfolio. Not a lot of people, given the sort of the natural time lag involved in property, actually doing much specifically about it at the moment, because it's going to take some time to come through. But it's a fairly brave organisation at the moment that would bet on that future, and that would actually commit a lot of money to creating something, because we're still learning. I still think we're in the first phase of the pandemic, really, in many respects, and we're still
Yeah.
learning about the effect on us, the effect on our work, the effect on our environments, and our urban environments as much as our workplaces. So again, that sort of the need for that constant dialogue, that open channel of communication, the preparedness to invest small amounts, to try things, to see what works, see what doesn't work, and continually evolve and maneuver that strategy, rather than doing it all in sort of in the way that old software used to work, really.
Yeah.
Those large scale software programs have pretty much failed. Back in 2001, the software industry learned how to deal with that, and we're in the workplace industry going to need to learn how to deal with that in the future.
Yeah, I love your minimal viable workplace concept. I don't know if you've copyrighted that or done anything with that, but I think that's great. I think it's a great concept. I think it's a great way for people to approach things. Yeah, it's really interesting. So, I mean, we're going to wrap up very soon, but I did want to touch on it from an employee perspective, right? Because in essence, employees are looking to give feedback to their organizations on what they think they need and how they're working today and what they want, how they think they want to work tomorrow. How should they eliminate the bias of what they think works for them today and think beyond what actually they need 1, 2, 3, 4 years from now?
It's a really hard thing to do. I mean, when I was sort of working within large organisations, I've lost count of the amount of times that I said to sort of leadership groups, there is always a property solution to a business challenge. It might not be the fastest or the cheapest, but there's always going to be a property solution. So don't think about property, just take that out of your minds and think about what it is you need,
Mm-hmm.
as an organisation, and then we'll find a way for the property to respond to that, because the property is in service of the organisation. So the workplace is in service of the work we do. Otherwise, we don't need it. If it can't stand up and justify itself in some way, then that's why a lot of organisations now are saying, well, hold on a minute. Actually, the way we're working seems to be working fine without a physical base. Do we actually need it? And they're doing that because for the first time in probably my whole time in this business, really, we're actually having an opportunity to question the purpose and the contribution it can make. And it's perfectly valid to arrive at a conclusion that says it doesn't have one, and it's perfectly valid as well to say there's a distinct purpose here. We need to pursue this. So I don't really sit in either of the sort of everyone work remotely or everyone back in the office camp. Again, I think there's a sort of balance there. But it is hard to suspend our sort of knowledge of what we have today. It's a really tricky challenge to just whiteboard this from scratch, just to say, imagine we have nothing. Let's just suppose we are starting from scratch. How would we do it today? And if we think, our cities have grown up in most sort of countries have grown up over hundreds of years, in some cases thousands. They're not the product of a team of people going away for a sort of on a weekend in a hotel with lots of coffee and cold towels and designing a city from scratch. That very rarely happens. These are things that are they're the things that make them inefficient are usually the things that give them their charm and the things we love to see about them. You know, they're the, sort of the attractions and the draws to that. But in terms of our own organisations and portfolios, you know, this is the best opportunity we've probably ever had to try and suspend that knowledge of what we have today and to think about it in the sort of purest possible sense.
Yeah, no, it's great, and you're talking about this, and I'm thinking about change, and I always go back to what you said in the elemental workplace. Workplace is a journey; it's never a destination, and therefore, whenever you say that, change, everything flows, nothing is ever started or finished, and I think that's a really interesting way to sort of draw the parallels and think about these things, right?
Yeah, I tried to avoid using the word journey in the second book, rather sort of having said that in the first book, it then rather became a feature of things like Britain's Got Talent and every star, talking about their own journey. And so yeah, I sort of I deliberately tried not to use that expression. It's actually quite difficult not to. But yes, there is that sort of sense that things have started. Everything that begins, has its origins elsewhere. Everything that begins in our mind has started before. And everything's going to go on long after we think it's finished. We just bookend things. It's a convenient thing for us to do.
Right.
This is when the project began. This is when the project finished. And if we think about a project finishing, we need to tell ourselves it's finished. Even if it kind of carries on, we need to draw a line somewhere because we need to go out for a beer and we need to celebrate and we need to sort of, and we need to, we put these bookends in place because it's helpful to us and it's helpful to our colleagues, and it means something to us all. But we'll probably still be dealing with it tomorrow. We might come in quite late, but we'll still be dealing with it tomorrow in that way, and everything we've worked on will morph into other things, and it will become something else. I remember when I was at school, my chemistry teacher, someone said he asked where someone's homework was. He said, it's disappeared. I remember the chemistry teacher saying, it's not disappeared. Nothing disappears. If you've made matter disappear, fantastic. Come and tell me, and we'll go into business and we'll make millions. But nothing disappears. And I remember that since I was about 13 or 14 years old, thinking, God, that's actually really interesting. Nothing disappears. And that's the same with change. Nothing we're working on ever really sort of vanishes. It's never completely dispensed with. It always becomes something else. I do think that sort of mindset is incredibly helpful to us. We impose far less sort of restrictions on ourselves, and I think we can deal with the challenges we face in a much more sort of appreciative fashion if we take on this mindset and we understand that we're just tapping into a flow, and we can draw our little lines at the beginning and at the end of these things, but avoiding that sort of tendency to package everything and sort of put it away when we finish. It's going to come back. It's not going to work that way.
No, I love that mindset. I love that mindset to change, and it is a reminder. Neil, thank you, man. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your insights and sharing it with OSW Daily, and I look forward to continue the conversation. We're going to have you back I think it's in a month's time. We've got it scheduled, so I look forward to digging a little bit deeper and hear some more of your insights.
Fantastic, thank you. And I just need to say before I go that the minimum viable workplace idea came from a good friend of mine, John Husband. So credit where it's due. He came up with it. I sort of took it away and thought, wow, I think you've actually solved this. So thanks to John.
No, thank you, and I appreciate you giving John a good shout out there. So, look, thank you. I'm going to leave back up on the slide what we started with, so people can still see it, because I think it's just a really good reminder of change, and when we think about change management, what the objectives are. So, Neil, thank you. I appreciate it, mate.
Thank you very much indeed. Great to be here. Thanks.
Cheers.